What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. I'm talking about 5 stars plus a couple sentences. Apple loves that stuff, and so do I. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin for all their support. And if you want to join those fine folks and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month. That's less than $1 an episode. And if you do that, you'll get some sweet, sweet perks for your support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. I've got an awesome guest today. I am so stoked to have Tommy Geoco on the show. Actually, Tommy, I don't know, is that how you pronounce your last name?
It's Tommy Geoco.
Geoco, okay. All right, cool. I've got Tommy Geoco on the show today. I'm so stoked to have him. If you haven't been following him on LinkedIn or TikTok or all the social media platforms out there, this guy is got his hands in everything. And one of the things that I'm really excited to talk to Tommy about today is when you can't find a job and you've been spending months, maybe a year looking for work, you gotta make some money somehow. And I feel like Tommy knows all about that, so I'm super stoked to have Tommy on the show. Tommy Geoco is a Phoenix-based product designer, former Marine, and tech entrepreneur. He boasts an illustrious 13-year career in the design industry. He's made his mark by co-founding SteamPro.io, a successful startup in the content creator space, which he sold in 2015. And since then, Tommy turned full-time to content creation on platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and LinkedIn, where he shares insightful perspectives on design and product building. He's author of the ebook Making Design Decisions. Tommy continues to educate and inspire his audience. His latest project, Teardown.ai, which just launched last week, I think, will explore the UI workflows of AI products, and while aiming for lofty future goals, including developing micro products and earning $5 million in the next 5 years, Tommy's primary aspiration remains inspiring others to achieve their professional dreams, which, Tommy, that's exactly why I want to have you on the show today. Welcome to Beyond UX Design, man. I am so stoked to have you. How's it going?
Hey, Jeremy. Thanks for having me, man. This is awesome.
Yeah, of course, dude. So, like I said, man, one of the things that I am fascinated by your journey is you seem to have done it all on your own. And obviously you had help. I'm sure you would say you probably didn't do it all by yourself, but there's so many people out there looking for work and they can't find it. And I feel like you are the man to give a lot of these folks some tips, some advice on what they might be able to do to make some money in the short term or maybe long term while they're looking for work. So I'm super stoked to talk about that today, man.
Well, and I'll start by saying this. It's tough right now. And I don't want to downplay that. I definitely feel for people who are looking to get work, especially in tech, in design, product management, because going through the interview process right now, I had this experience recently with there was like an interesting role that came up. I thought I'd throw my hat in the ring, and it's almost like an offensive process. A lot of these interviewing cycles have become. And I used to actually wear those going through that process years ago. I used to wear that as kind of like a badge of honor, like, oh yeah, that's just how we do things. And now it's less like, I hate that that's how things are done now.
Why should it be that way? Right.
When I first started in this field, there's a very big difference too. What I've learned in talking to so many designers today is that you have a lot of designers who, and I'm one of these, who came up into this role, but the aspiration didn't start as, I want to be a designer, so I'm going to do X, Y, and Z things to try and land a role as a designer. You have a lot of people who wanted to build product. Maybe they were entrepreneurs or maybe they were like developers and started to see that their interests and skill sets aligned more on the design side, and the design field started to open up more and more. And this is, 2005, 2010 period. And then we really started to lean into that. And now you have a lot of people who are starting on day one with the aspiration of, I want to be a designer. And then, the options are boot camps and traditional education and all these other paths. And so when people ask me, how can I get a job today as a designer? It's not an easy question for me to relate to entirely with that group. But what I do have experience in is, one, I came out of the military, 4 kids and a wife in tow. And the ceiling of obligation, like financial obligation that I
Yeah,
had to
bet.
meet
Yeah.
right away, was much higher than I think your typical, at the time, I think I was maybe 24, 23. That's a big obligation at 23. And I
Dude,
didn't have the
I can
skills I
imagine, man.
needed coming out of the Marine Corps to do that. But I knew that I had a little bit of inclination towards like web development. And so I kind of leaned into that. And I tried the traditional route of school. That's not for me. I needed more actionable learning material, like things
Yeah.
that I could learn that day and apply tomorrow.
Sure,
And
yeah.
while I appreciated a lot of the prerequisites and the things that traditional education was trying to offer me, it wasn't doing it. It wasn't cutting
Yeah.
it. Like I needed to make money. I needed to make money by Friday. And so for me, it was like a lot of web resources, taking flyers out on people who I don't know if they're the best person teaching this material, but I'm going to buy their product and I'm going to try to apply it to the, how to create a WordPress theme or how to code PHP, like really learning scrappy and turning around and finding a way to sell that value to other people. So I immediately, from day one coming out of the Marine Corps, when I became very keenly aware that that wasn't the lifestyle I wanted to live, being gone all the time.
Sure.
And
I bet, man,
instead,
yeah.
I said, I'm just gonna keep hard charging towards, let me try to make this new career happen. So that was my first like career shift. So I get a lot of people asking questions like, how do I bridge the gap? Well, I wouldn't recommend doing it the way I did, which was having only $5,000 in your bank account and going like, I'm just going to learn a skill and try to sell that skill any way I know how. And I did all kinds of things to try and sell it, picking up the phone and calling small businesses around me to see if they needed WordPress sites, scraping yellowpages.com and Yelp and contacting businesses that way, and just really grassroots stuff. And ultimately for me, when I first started, and this was like 2010 period, it was like the freelance job boards that really helped me.
Yeah.
And they were low quality gigs, but
Sure.
they were gigs.
Local companies, needing a website or something, yeah.
But like they gave me, Alex Hormozy talks about like the knowledge debt gap. And I don't love everything that he says, and I'm always wary of like knowledge gurus. But there's some value right there in the knowledge debt idea, which basically says that if you're doing a career transition or you're trying to get into something new, whether it's like a side hustle or any kind of project, you do need to learn the skills to make that thing happen. But you also need to afford the time, and you're going to pay for it in one way or another, to learn what you don't know. And that might be a skill, that might be like domain specific. Like if you're trying to get into AI, there might be a lot of things that you have to kind of uncover as you get into that space. And you can learn that through time, or you can learn that through throwing money at it and paying for somebody else's productization of the things they've learned, which will speed up your time. But in some way, you need to cross that knowledge, that gap that's going to happen, that pay off that knowledge debt. And for me, getting into the freelance side was like, it was a way to start paying off that knowledge debt, just trying. And it was a terribly stressful way to do it because I was learning what I didn't know in ways that would be consequential to the product. And so I was spending all my week working on on getting that service shipped to the client, and then also spending an additional amount of time trying to learn it as I was going. And so that was the initial start for me. And the reason I tell that story is because today, if people ask me, like, I want to transition or I want to try to get into a side project so I don't always have to rely on my, on the salary or seeking salary somewhere, I wouldn't say just up and ditch everything and go and do it the way that I did it. I was fortunate that worked out long term, but initially it was really, really detrimental to my mental health. It was really detrimental to my relationships. And if I could do it again, and I'm kind of doing that this time around, or I did that this time around, I would take on an additional amount of hours on the side that was sustainable for me. Maybe it's 5 to 10 hours a week, and start chipping away at that knowledge debt. I would buy a product that maybe helps me when I don't have enough time to, I don't have 4 weeks to learn the thing. I'd rather learn it in 2 weeks. I'd pay for that difference. And then at the same time, I would kind of learn as I go. So what that looks like to me is, if I want to learn how to create content on social media, right? And this could be a number of different things. I would just start doing that. I might buy like a course on how to do that. I might research a couple of courses. There's plenty of them today. There's courses on everything today. And as much as those get a bad rap, I actually think there's some, like, I wish that kind of thing existed when I first started.
Yeah, for sure. Seriously.
You know? And so I would look at something like that, and I'd pair that with a small, and be ambitious long term, but like pick something small that you can kind of create right now and maybe launch in the next 30 days, whether that's like a social media content channel or it's a product on the internet, anything like that, a Notion template. and pair that course with just your efforts. So try, get stuck, buy some information, pay off some of that knowledge debt with cash, get unstuck, right? Because you apply it to your project, rinse, repeat. And that for me has been the way that I now cross those knowledge debt, or pay off that knowledge debt, while still kind of keeping the maintenance on my financial obligations. And that's the way I would recommend for people to kind of think about that right now, while you're in the process of job hunting or making a career transition, or you're working at a place that you don't really want to be at much longer, but you know, you can kind of entertain some of the ideas on the side without putting yourself in that financial burden. Because the minute that financial burden becomes too heavy is when everything goes out the window. I mean, your life just gets so much more stressful. You get way less productive. All these ambitions start to feel hopeless if you're not able to meet that initial financial obligation. So I really have high risk tolerance at times. But the way I initially did it was pretty irresponsible, and I like to call that contrast out. I'm wiser now, and so certainly do what you can to maintain that financial obligation and chip away intelligently.
So having 2 kids of my own right now, I can't imagine doing that with 4 kids. And going off and building my own thing. My wife and I actually, my backstory, I feel like it's very similar to yours. I wasn't in the military, obviously, but I started doing websites back in the day. So I built my first website 2002, 2003 with like GeoCities, right, back in the day. Yeah. And eventually I got into doing WordPress sites. And my wife and I, she's actually a designer as well. She's a graphic designer. We got into doing our own kind of thing. And we did a very different route, though. And we got burnt out very quickly. And I want to point this out. You're mentioning productizing and selling something. We did the service route where we would do hourly rates. I think at the time it was like $75 an hour, and we would do our own thing. And it got to the point where doing the service stuff, and this is something I want to talk to you about in a second. But doing the service stuff, you can only make as much as you're able to work, right? Versus the product, you can sell, and you have as many as you could sell. You can make as much money as you could possibly sell. Versus the service side, where you can only work, you can only make as much as you're able to work. So very different. And we went that route, and I was actually working full time. She was doing it on the side. So we had our own little gig, and we had our own little LLC, and we had a bunch of clients doing websites and print design and logo design and website design. But I feel like that was the kind of thing we got burnt out because we weren't selling a product. We were doing the hourly rates, and we weren't making a lot. I think Amy was making $50,000 a year, and that was with both of us actually, though. So really it was making 25 each, but all the money went to her so she could have her salary, and I was still working full time. And that was like hard, man. And then we finally quit because we wanted to have kids, and we were like, we can't afford to have kids if we do this full time. How are you going to work when we're trying to like handle kids and everything? And just like you said, man, that was exactly what happened. The financial burden got to be like, you know what, I can't. I got to go get a job because I can't do this anymore. And you went through it. You powered through, which I'm mad props for that. But yeah, it's a very similar backstory. I think we just kind of went the opposite route and ended up not, and now we both work full time. But anyway, I don't know. It's fascinating that you mentioned that. I love that idea, calling out the product to sell.
Well, and that's a great call out, because I think what I learned, and I'm still like, I've been doing this for 13 years now. And there's a lot where I'm at today is like I value audience building significantly, and I'll get into like why, but it first started, I was like you, like I did service-based businesses, right? Like that was my thing. I was providing hourly rates. I was trying to learn how to get like better retainers so that if I
Yeah.
could charge a retainer, it could be more predictable. And, it would
Yeah.
be 4 years since I actually broke into like what I felt like were more mature product organizations. And I was working very like agency, very like high stress, just like deliverable output. And that didn't necessarily change a ton when I went to these so-called mature product organizations, but being in-house was something I really enjoyed. But before I got to that place, what I was doing while I was doing service-based work, and one of the things I tried to do for a long time, really what got me into this was I knew that I wanted, and I was kind of like romanticizing like the VC, the venture capitalist like play of building a software. At the time, like Silicon Valley was just pumping out interviews with VCs and founders like, Drew Houston, Dropbox, like the people that were killing it out there. And I was like, really like, oh, I really want to try to create a product and build a business. I don't want to continue doing service-based forever. And so I would go through a number of products on the side, and it was really important for me to try to have a partner in that because I knew that I wouldn't be able to do it by myself. And I was really fortunate to meet who would eventually become one of my technical co-founders on a number of products that we released. And so we would work on those products on the side, and then I would do a whole bunch of agency work, and I was extremely overworked. And I'll talk a little bit about how I've like dealt with overworking because that became a really big
please do.
pivotal moment in my life later. But I was just grinding. We'd launch a product, it wouldn't do very well. We'd launch a product, it wouldn't do very well. And then we launched a product and it did extremely well. And we were floored. We had no idea what to do about it. But what I knew was as soon as it started doing well, I wanted nothing to do with anybody else's stuff. Like I didn't that was like so incredibly difficult to care about the clients I was working for outside of like the relationships that I had built with them, which was the only thing that kept me going. I really just did not want to work on that. I wanted to work on the thing that I could make work that I really enjoyed, that to me was the representation of a future where I didn't have to work as hard, but I still got to focus on like my vision of what I thought was valuable. And our customers loved the product. And so it was just like the full circle of everything that was really rewarding to me. And that feeling I became quickly, like that became the North Star for how I wanted to continue forward.
Yeah, right.
And we would sell that product. I would learn a lot of heartbreaking lessons about getting into the deep end in Silicon Valley and selling to large capital and the vision's going to be yours, but the vision's not actually yours, and
I bet,
all the things that come with that. So I stayed with the acquiring company for about a year. And then at that point, I had made some money, but not enough money to just work on my own things. But I was working out of Silicon Valley, and I stayed out there for about 4 years. And living in the Bay changed my view on product. I learned so much from so many smart people. I finally had felt like somebody who was using kind of piecemeal lessons from the internet and not really knowing the who's who to kind of listen to, or at least having an idea of how to evaluate the quote unquote who's who. I started to feel a little bit more plugged in and really started to understand the value of product design. And that's when I decided if I'm going to go to the labor force, I looked at the skills that I had to leverage over the last 4 years leading up to that point of that sale. And it was, it was development, it was design, it was marketing. There were so many hats I had worn. And then I had to ask like the scary question is like, am I even employable? Because of how when you feel so general, like it feels hard to kind of pigeonhole yourself into one thing. At the same time, when you only represent yourself as I'm a designer, it's like, does my body of work even represent what I do? Because I would try to go into interviews and talk about, I started this business and I tried to do this thing. It's like, when you're applying for a role, those things are great, but that's not the conversation.
No,
for
they're
that.
looking for it, right? Yeah.
So and it was I became very aware at that point that I worked out in the Bay for 4 or 5 years, and that the big thing out there that I learned was the different ways that we could create systems around delivering product. And I really wanted to start finding ways to do that. Again, I got the itch to kind of create my own products, but I wanted to do it smarter because in selling that company, a few things had happened. Up to that point, I had gotten divorced. I even had a mental health crisis at one point. Following that, I really was having kind of this crisis about identity. I had come from the Marine Corps and jumped into just continuously running into trying to shift to be working in tech. I wasn't even saying I wanted to be a designer. I was actually trying to learn to code really well. And there was no, and one of the things that happens a lot when you come from one career to the next, and this is huge in the military as well, regardless of, your experience in the military, leaving the military is a shift in identity. And a lot of people build like a self-worth out of the identity. And I never really mourned that because I immediately was considering myself, no, I'm replacing my identity. I feel like an entrepreneur. I'm a technologist, and I lived in that. And then I had a startup and I sold it, and I got to live in that, and I got to kind of bask in this, oh, you sold a startup identity, and it felt validating. And then I left the company and I was working in the Bay, but now I was no longer a startup founder. And so I had my next identity crisis, and I think it all just stacked and it weighed, and it felt like I had been working so hard for so many years, for so many hours. And it felt by the time I kind of took inventory, I was like, I don't know if this was worth it. And that was a really dramatic moment for me to really step back and say, like, what does it actually mean to want to work hard, and where's the balance at, and how can I do this better later in my life? And so I'm going to pause for a second and just kind of let that's a big story.
I'm thinking about like the ties between folks that are maybe career shifting, because there's a lot of people that listen to this that are career shifters, a lot of junior designers, but a lot of career shifters as well. And, for instance, I know several people who have come from, the culinary field, chefs, working in service industry, things like that, teachers, and there's for sure an identity that goes along with being, when you say teacher, something comes to your head like, oh, that's a teacher, so there's that identity tied to that. And for those people that make that shift from anything really to design, I feel like a lot of people go through that. I don't think certainly I feel like the military might be a little different for sure because of, going through boot camp and, the idea like tearing you down to build you back up to in the mold of the Marines, right? My dad was a Marine, so I know all about that. Once a Marine, always a Marine. So, that's kind of fascinating even in and of itself. But that idea though of having an identity and going from one to the other, there's probably a spectrum there. But I feel like that's something that a lot of people go through, and especially when people are thinking, I'm not going to be a teacher anymore. I'm going to be a UX designer. I'm going to be a designer or something. And then they go and look for a job and they can't find a job for months and months at a time. That's painful. That hurts. So I'm curious, do you have any advice for people going through that and how they might be able to get through that? Or is that just so personal it's maybe hard to give advice? I don't know.
It's a tough thing to give advice to. Because it is very difficult, especially for certain societies, to not assign and get our self-worth out of like our professional contributions, our titles, the things that make us. And I'll tell you what, I'll get to like what I might say as advice, but just to empathize a little bit with that, when I moved out to San Francisco, people looked at me and said, oh, you like sold a company and that's awesome. And I thought, okay, that's great. But I was looking around me. I have no college education, right? And I'm living in San Francisco, and everyone around me is like either Ivy League or just have, in my mind, these accomplishments and these accolades that I'm not used to being around. And I'm not, so I really started to feel imposter syndrome. My first role was a product designer at a company, my favorite company that I've ever worked at still to this day, called Quantcast. And I learned so much there. And the people that I got to learn from and work with were incredibly talented, very smart people. And I was terrified. I'm like, how did I even land this role? They're going to figure this out eventually,
right.
Was my thinking. And, the thing that I just leaned back on for me, because imposter syndrome and kind of this fear of am I good enough? Am I even going to be qualified to sit at the same table as some of these people? One, what I've learned is to live inside of that. And it can be a very uncomfortable and scary feeling. For me, and I hate military and sports analogies, but there is a little bit of the military that I leaned on when I would think about imposter syndrome, which is there's a really terrifying situation in front of me, and I need to kind of run towards it to deal with it rather than escape away from it in things like alcohol or avoidance or whatever other kinds of things I can manifest to protect my mental state from that fear. I need to lean into it. And so when I think about imposter syndrome, now I associate it with things like growth. Okay, this is a scary situation because I don't know what I need to know. So how can I prepare for this so that I can be at least a little more successful than if it just blindsided me? And preparation is huge. And this can go for anything from like you have a design meeting coming up, and it's maybe your first, big feedback meeting with some key stakeholders in the room that maybe you haven't interacted with yet. Or, you have to pitch a business idea to a room of investors, or you have to even just give a speech to people. Public speaking is terrifying for some folks. Or it's just, I'm going to make the transition, or I need to ask for a raise. No matter what it is, and this is what I meant earlier when I say my method to approaching any of these things is to try, get stuck, learn, get unstuck. And that little sequence has carried me through so many of these terrifying paths of unknown. So, okay, I'm just going to start walking. I'm eventually going to run into a brick wall. When I hit that brick wall, I'm going to have a reaction to go, oh crap. I don't know what to do here. I guess I should turn around. But I'm going to stop. I'm going to evaluate the wall, whatever the challenge is. I'm going to look for some information that's very specific to solving this problem in front of me, not something more high level than that, just necessary for what I need right now. And then I'm going to go past that. So if it's, how to public speak, or it's like, are there templates I can get that will help me give this presentation better? I'll add my own flair. And suddenly, like, you start to do that, and you might not nail it the first time. I often didn't, but you still get through it. And in getting through it, you go, here's what worked, here's what I would do differently. And then you start to have your own personal data points you can pull things from. And for me, when you start to accumulate more of those, the more you do some of this, the more you go through the hiring cycle, everyone knows that your first interview is typically the worst. And then your later stages of the interviews, you become a pro at talking about yourself or explaining a piece of your work. And the same goes for absolutely everything else you do. So the question was about how do I deal with the identity crisis? And that's not necessarily the full bit of advice. But the first part I would say is use that small framework for getting through anything that's immediately terrifying to you. And in an identity crisis, the thing that's terrifying to you is this idea that your self-worth is going away and you're starting from, ground, from day one. And no longer you're getting the kind of reception about who you are as this external feedback. Pushing through that, trying to afford yourself not to need permission from anybody but yourself to move forward in that direction. And yeah, you might have to take some steps back and take a lower salary. You might have to, you might have been respected and regarded as kind of the authority in a space before, whereas you're coming into a place where you're looking up to everybody for answers. And if you can get through that part of it, then don't look for permission. Just do and try and get stuck and go through the process until you start to have your own data points where suddenly you are kind of a person that a few folks are looking to. And that's how you start to build your value in any role.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned something like the military, taking some things away. And it's funny, I had an interview not long ago with Andrew Rice. Do you know him? He's a Marine. He's on LinkedIn.
Yeah. I've talked with him actually.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, he's a great dude. Anyway, we were talking not long ago, and we brought up this idea of VUCA, which is actually something that I think it was the U.S. War College or something like that, the Military War College. I'm not exactly sure who came up with it, but the military came up with this idea of VUCA after the collapse of the Soviet Union: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And the idea was, now the Soviet Union broke up, all these all these rogue states with nukes and all the tanks and planes and everything else that the Soviet Union had, right? What are they going to do? How are they going to react?
Yeah.
So they came up with this concept of VUCA, and it's something like I actually learned in a leadership training that I had for work, but it applies to life in general. And I think especially like a lot of the things like you're talking about, right? Volatile, things change all the time, uncertain, like we don't know what's going on, complex, a million little moving parts, ambiguous, it's like all these things are just hazy and fuzzy and we don't really understand. That's like life, but that's also career shifting. That's trying to find a job. That's trying to interview. That's trying to start a business.
Yeah.
That's like so much that there's, it's interesting. You talk a lot about understanding the unknowns and learning and getting stuck and then or getting stuck and then learning and then progressing forward. And to me, that idea that you got from the military, I think is so profound. And a lot of people, when they think about the military, they think of like, grunts, saluting or doing push-ups or something.
Right.
But there's a lot of really interesting concepts there that I feel like, we could probably talk for another hour just about that stuff alone. But I just want to point that out, that idea of VUCA and how this concept can apply to all the things that you're talking about, and it's just such a fascinating concept. I don't know if you've ever heard of that term before, but
so I haven't heard of VUCA,
awesome.
and I was just a grunt on the ground, like a literal grunt on the ground, and so like we had lots of ditties and different things that we would use that I have used and including like there's one for preparation, right? Piss poor performance, or I can't even remember it now. It's been so many years, but there are things I've taken that have really helped me here, and I recognize it's a tired analogy sometimes to write about that stuff, but I do sometimes talk about, some of the same principles for getting through like an ambiguous or terrifying situation. I used to say something to myself to keep kind of my mental health in check, which was, hey, relax, you're not saving lives anymore. Like this before it used to be.
Yeah.
And I realized like saying that out loud is not actually very helpful. And it kind of downplays like, because the work we are doing can be stressful and it is tough. And I realized it used to take away from that. So I've kind of learned like which analogies best serve these circumstances. But, what I will say is when I think about what I did in the first half of my career and how I'm approaching kind of this second half, I don't know what chapter I'm in. Maybe it's the third, but
who knows?
The thing is I used to put all my eggs into a single basket. And, with the economy, we have no idea where this economy is going to go. We don't know how AI is going to impact the landscape of this role. Sure. There's a lot of infighting and what it means to be a designer today, more than I think there's ever been.
Man.
It's really just
insane.
It's taken a lot of time, and I think it's causing a lot of people. I think it's causing a lot of inner turmoil for people who are trying to make money doing this. And for me, I see these arguments, and I look at my past on how I kind of came up into this role, and all I ever wanted to do was to create value for people in some small corner of the world that allowed me to feel like my work was meaningful and provide for my family. That's all I've ever wanted. That has been like the true guiding light. And I didn't want to sacrifice my mental health and my physical health and my relationships to do that. And it started to feel like that's an impossible dream. Like there's no way you can get that. There's just nothing you can do. And that was a dangerous thought. Cynicism has got to get its butt out of the room if you want to accomplish that. I promise you today, if you're a cynical person, you won't accomplish that. Cynicism will destroy any of those ambitions for you. It'll make you feel clever, and you might have a couple good quips on the internet or at a party, but that's as far as cynicism will get you. And so when I really I noticed the cynicism kind of creeping in, and I thought, was Stream Pro kind of my one-hit wonder at possibly achieving that outcome? And there was something I started to notice, because when I first started in this, and even before my time, it was, if you're going to build a company, get yourself a developer, an engineer, co-founder. They will help build this and bring a certain domain experience that you need in the room. And then, Steve Jobs and Apple started to really receive their flowers, and the narrative kind of shift to if you want a really good company, get yourself a design co-founder, because they're going to really help elevate that customer and user experience. And then it's starting to turn differently now. And so when I look at the state of things today, social media has plenty of warts that we can criticize, and its impact on society. One of the things that social media does incredibly well is it allows the little people like you and I to have easy access to distribution in a world that used to gatekeep distribution behind paywalls and you know, the who's who if you had a network. And so what I have realized now is the conversation is now, if you want to start building better moats around your company, you want to start building better value from day one, get yourself a co-founder with an audience already. And that can potentially, and it's not as simple as that, but what I've learned can be, it can really be an incubator for new business ideas. And so I think about, okay, I used to, you know, I want this value add to create for people. I want to have this lifestyle where I can create value, do some creative work, but also just enjoy my life and not, you know, lose all the things I love about it in the process. Creating content and building an audience really started to make a lot of sense to me. And so when people ask me, like, how can I start thinking about getting into the space, I'm not saying you need to create an audience. But when I look at the first half of my life and I look at my life now, what I do think people need to remember, designers especially, is like, why are you getting into this field? For me, it was I wanted to create value. And value comes in so many shapes and sizes. And being a designer is not the only way I can create value. I can be a developer, I can be an entrepreneur. And what is value? And I think a lot of times I hear a lot of junior designers today talk about value in this really simple form of, it's a piece of software. It must be a piece of software, and it has to look like this and behave like this, and it must achieve design excellence, and it must do this and have this thing. And the idea of value has gotten so convoluted in the conversation today. And then those same people will look over at somebody who is selling or providing a Notion template full of resources, for example, and they'll criticize that piece of value. They'll say that's low effort, and that's not design excellent, and that's just a something someone wrote up in their basement, but that's valuable to somebody.
Somebody's paying for it, yeah.
And I bring that kind of example up, and I don't sell Notion templates or things like that, but I bring that example up to get people to start kind of exercising within their own mind. Like, what is value, and how can I create that for people? Is it a service-based thing I can do for someone? Is it a one-on-one I can provide to somebody? Is it a piece of software that I can maybe use like a Webflow tool to no code and make a really hacky version before I validate if I should invest into developers to make it more robust? Like, what does that look like? And are there things I can be doing today to make that? There's so many people who are starting out in this field, and they're like, are there some, free design exercises I can do? And there's some websites out there with prompts, and you can create a thing in Figma, and then it just lives and dies in your Figma file. And that's okay. Hey, put that on your portfolio. Maybe it'll represent some of your visual design skills. But the other side of it is like, what can you actually do that might actually create value in a way someone will trade $1 for it?
Right. Yeah.
And it could be a Notion template. Like, your entire learning journey, as you're paying off that knowledge debt, your entire learning journey could be productized. You could turn that into something. Hey, I'm going to start a social media. I'm going to start a TikTok or a Twitter account, and I'm just going to like document my experience trying to get a job as a day one designer, transferring over from a different field. And I'm going to put all my resources in this thing. I'm going to tell you what's working. I'm going to, you're not going to record your conversations, but I'm going to let you know the questions I asked. And like, that kind of thing is going to be valuable to people. And I think this is what I mean by being permissionless. There's so many people who would say, yeah, but who am I? No one wants to hear that. There are so many people who would at least want someone to empathize with and to be within in a similar setting to see what's working. Sure, it would be helpful for us to be able to have access to more senior folks who can give us answers right away. But don't, like, for example, the Slack group that you and I met in is a Slack group that I put together last year when I decided to go full time into this effort. And I didn't put it together to create a paid community. I didn't put it together to have any sort of monetary benefit. I put it together just because I wanted a place for other design content creators with audiences of any size to come and commiserate together, because I was lonely. I was just lonely,
Yeah.
and it was a terrifying prospect going full time into content creation.
Yeah, man.
And
So
that Slack group has turned into something tremendous. And so I'll finish by saying,
yeah, yeah, go ahead.
I would recommend to people going through their journey to think about ways that you can kind of cross pollinate with other little efforts. Put it in a Notion template, build a small community of people. And by build a community, it can be just like, hey, do you want to just like share what's working for you, and we'll celebrate each other's wins? Oh, you just got hired. Like, let's go, you know?
Yeah, I love it. Well, you mentioned something too. I want to call out and talk about that a minute. But being permissionless, like not waiting for permission to do something, not like thinking outside of your own little box of what you think you know. And I think a lot about, when designers, they want to be designers. I want to be a designer. And they think about productizing something or selling something. They think, well, I have to sell something design related, obviously, because I'm a designer now.
Right.
But especially people that have come over career shifting. If you were in theater, create a course about theater.
Yes.
Sell that. If you were in, if you were in the culinary, to create a course about how to chop onions, different ways to chop things, and put that on Udemy or something. I guarantee you there are people out there that are like, I would love to learn how to chop.
Right.
Let me, I want to go or put it on YouTube or something. You don't have to create something just because you're a new designer doesn't mean you have to focus on that design field and think you have to sell something or build something related to that. I just love that you call that out.
One of the things I really try to teach a lot of designers is how effective of an entrepreneur many of us can be because of some of the skills that are in this field. And even if you haven't been in this field for a while, but you have an inclination towards certain skills like user research, visual design, thinking through the customer or the user workflow of the entire business or product. If those things you're really into, that's fantastic. Like minimum viable skills as an entrepreneur with a new idea. and just what you said, like all the products I've created up until this past year, because now I look back at the things I've been good at, and design is now one of those things. And so I productize a book about it, and I'm doing some other things. It's not the only thing though, right? When I first started, I looked at what are the things I liked or that I was good at. Where for me, I had a very big interest in esports. It was kind of my escape when I wasn't working so hard. Yeah. And so I was really big into tuning in at certain esports. Dota 2 has always been my favorite. And so I would tune into that a lot. And so that was one of the first products we created, was an esports app. And that didn't go very well. But what it did is by working on something like that, this wasn't a spec project. I mean, it was a real thing that went to market. It made a few bucks. It had like 10,000 users at one point.
Oh, wow.
But working on, and that makes such a great case study. Even if you fail at these little micro experiments, they become kind of real experiments. And you're like, here's what I learned from this. And I'll tell you, having been on the hiring manager end, when I meet people who are, when I'm interviewing and I'm looking at people's projects and I see, oh, like you tried to take something to market. That's so much more compelling than just getting like, case studies that are kind of enclosed into their own thing. And I empathize with, there's a lot of challenges in taking something to market, especially an app. You need a developer, and that comes with a whole slog of issues. Like, where do I find them? Should I outsource? How much money should I spend on that? And I recognize that, but I will say, problem solve that. Try, get stuck, learn. Is the only process to buy development time? Is there a no-code tool that you could create an MVP from? And there's many coming out today. Yeah. Is there a smaller version? For example, teardowns.ai. I just released a product. It is a library of video and screenshots of AI products. Basically, I was working on an AI product earlier this year, and pageflows.com is a fantastic resource I've used for a big chunk of my career. And it just is breakdowns of like onboarding and e-commerce workflows. And there was nothing that existed even inside of Pageflows that documented AI workflows, because they're so new and so many products are still implementing those. But there's not a lot of ceiling on UI and UX patterns in desktop and mobile products today. I think we are we are reaching, in some cases we've reached the ceiling and we're just kind of reinventing wheels. But AI does offer some new ways to approach its implementation. And I wanted to document that. So one, I wanted to learn personally. I was already documenting these patterns. I was going through a product, I'd sign up for it, I'd record some screenshots. And the hardest part was I'd try to classify, like, what were the shared, if I were to categorize a pattern,
patterns, yeah.
what is the pattern?
Right.
And that was kind of hard to do. And I'm sure that's going to continue to change over time. But because I was already doing that, I was putting it in a Notion database. I was having a link to the video, and that by itself. So I got over 100 of those now. But because I was already doing that work, and I decided to do kind of the extra 30% to actually make it available to the public and charge for it, I could have just sold that Notion template, or that Notion document, not template.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I could have just sold that. And I'm sure that would have made a little bit of money. That's not going to be, what you build your family's nest egg on top of.
Sure.
But it is a way to start thinking about what are the things you're already doing now that you could take a step further. And as a designer with the kind of skills we have, you could go off and design that landing page, and you could test the market with that. And your customers, as they start to, send their emails in to sign up for this product, you could start to send them questionnaires or ask for feedback and apply that feedback to that product. And then if you get some validation, then take the next step and get it developed into an actual app like I did. And so that's the kind of thing I want people to think about, is like, what is value? Well, value, the end state might be this piece of software that you want to get created. But what's valuable about that? Is it like, it probably increases the experience to have a really nice navigation and a really nice polished visual design. But you might be able to get away up front by just testing that out. And in doing so, maybe it earns you a tiny bit of runway to keep moving towards that next version.
So I want to call out something again that you mentioned, and I think this is actually like a really fascinating way to look at it. And I wonder if you've ever thought about it this way. But there's a lot of people out there that are listening to this right now that are probably like, I could never be an entrepreneur, like working on my own. No way. That's terrifying, right? But you just said something. I want to put a couple things together.
Okay.
You did the first 70%. Putting it all together for other stuff, and then you just took the other 30%. The other thing you mentioned was you've got a case study. You got something there, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of these junior designers or career transitioners are looking to build up a portfolio. And I talked to Colton and Ludovic from Kick-Ass UX not long ago, and one of the things I love that they do is they really encourage people to find something they're passionate about and do a case study for that. And one of the things, I'm putting all this together, but one of the things that I love is that you mentioned you got to do a case study. Find something you're passionate about. Start doing the work. And once you've done that, you've got your 70% of the way there. How much effort is it to take it 30% more and try to monetize it? Right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people out there that are thinking about, like, you dip your toes in, just try it out and see, run an experiment, like you said. Now you've got a really cool case study, even if you never monetize it at all, even if you don't go the other 30%, you got a cool case study. And when you go and interview with somebody, that passion about that problem that you found is going to shine through, and way more than the dog walking app or whatever other bullshit prompt you found online or your boot camp gave you to do a case study on, right? So even if you don't take it that other 30%, doing what you're talking about is still valuable because it gives you something that you can really speak to and impress somebody with the passion when you describe it in that meeting, in that interview.
Right.
So anyway, I just found that fascinating. I like putting all those things together, and I just love that advice. You got the 70%, just take it 30% more and see what happens.
And it is an exercise. I mean, you have to, it's really thinking like, I can't remember the term that Amazon uses for it, but they look at their waste. They say, we're already producing this stuff and it doesn't get used anywhere. Where can we take some of that and leverage it further? And make it work for us even more. And I think that's a really smart concept to apply to just the things we do on a day-to-day. And that's really, for me, it's like I have a problem now where there's so many shiny objects in front of me. I have to regularly workshop where to focus. Yeah. And I use like this decision matrix process that really helps me. Because when you have so many things in front of you, like where to focus, is a really scary prospect. Like if you invest into this thing, that opportunity cost of not investing into other thing is, terrifying. Yeah. But the thing that I would say to people is when you start exercising that muscle of like, where do I have waste that I can like repurpose into something that works for me? And for the people who aren't entrepreneurial, I used to think being entrepreneurial meant I had to be like type A on CNBC, like running an entire company. And I have a presence online now. I've learned how to talk on the microphone, but I'm exhausted when I do live streams. I'm exhausted when I'm in social settings. I would way rather like nerd out on esports or do something in private. Like I'm a very private person who likes to just enjoy my family time. And I'm not, so I don't know if I'm an extrovert. I don't feel like I am. I don't feel like I get energized from that. But a lot of people would argue I'm not an introvert. But I think I am an introvert when it comes to businesses. And the reason I bring that up is because my goal now is to just build businesses out of the office, hang out with the family. And I don't want to have big teams. I want to have maybe like a couple of people that we do some work together. And that's like as big as I don't want to grow and scale and do all these things. And I feel like for people who think they're not entrepreneurial, they might suffer from what I suffered from, which was like the only version of entrepreneurial that they're aware of has to be this like high performing type A in front of the public all the time personality. And that's just not true. Yeah. And so I want to like, just if you're somebody who's already doing spec work, you do a prompt on a dog walking app, there's other things you could do to leverage that quote unquote waste that goes beyond just now this is now part of my portfolio. You could showcase that on social media. There's someone we know, Soren, and he does these fantastic bite-sized, absurd UI designs. It's like, what if Uber
I love it so much, yeah.
What if Uber had like you had to fight for your seat, or like these different features that are starting to go quite viral all over social media. And it's a small thing, right? He's not charging for that. And actually, I'm sorry, he made a book. He made a coffee table book, which I think is doing pretty well now.
I love it.
Awesome designs. And that's the entrepreneurial spirit. That is not somebody who's this type A standing in front of people. They're just doing something they've already enjoyed doing, taking that extra 30%, posting it online. And the second order effects of doing things like that include building an audience. And what I'm learning about audience building is once you have an audience, you can start to take new little ideas to that audience, and they'll tell you if they're valuable enough, and they'll pay for them if they are, and they won't pay for them if they're not. And that becomes such an asset to people, and you can do it from your bedroom. You don't have to make videos like I do. You can do it without even having to put your face on screen. And so for the introverted entrepreneur, I would say, like, consider that you can do those things. Now, here's the one asterisk, and this is what I talked about early on. These aren't things that you can do that will make a change in your life significantly tomorrow. Right? These are marathons. These are things you do because you enjoy them and because you have like a small gut feeling that they can turn into more down the road. And in the meantime, you have to solve for your immediate problems, your immediate financial obligations. And so that's why I tell people, don't do what I did, which was take the big plunge. One day you will have to make a decision to take what feels like a plunge. But that day shouldn't be the day where tomorrow you have zero money. Save up a nest egg before you take a plunge, or find a way to work a few less hours while you're taking this, this feeling of a plunge. But the biggest thing is to just give a little bit of time to some of those side hustles. And that's kind of a bad word. Hard work is kind of a bad word today. There's a little bit of cynicism in that. Hard work is necessary.
Right.
Balancing hard work's really important.
Right.
And I want people to understand that, because there's a lot of people who just push back against the aspect. I'm already working 40 hours a week. I'm not going to put an additional 10 when I could be spending that time with my family. That's a fair thing to say. But sometimes if you put in that extra 10, you can still find time with the family. You can absolutely do it that way. And not every week has to be a 50-hour week. Maybe you're just doing 10 hours across 2 weeks, and you're putting in a little bit of time here and there. And then once you start to create these feedback mechanisms, you get these little dopamine hits it's kind of a mind hack. If you can start to find some, and this is what's dangerous, because if you rely on that stuff and then it goes away, that creates a bad cycle. But for those who kind of need that external motivation, building audiences or putting things out there and getting feedback can be one of those ways. Sometimes that stuff can serve as a positive feedback loop.
One of the things that you're talking about, Soren, for instance, and having this big, audience and trying little things, and he doesn't necessarily do this, but let's say you've got 100,000 followers on something,
Right.
or you've built up 50,000, whatever it is, 10,000, doesn't matter. There's a lot of people out there that would be very into, let me try a little thing. I'm just gonna throw that out there, see if it works.
Yeah.
There's a large portion of people that'd be like, oh my God, what if I do it and it fails miserably?
Oh,
What are people going to think of me?
yeah.
And the thing that I've learned doing this podcast is if nobody buys it, it's a good chance nobody paid attention to in the first place, even know that it was a failure. So nobody cares, like that's the thing. Just try it. And especially with the great thing about the kind of stuff that we might do, very low overhead a lot of times. Maybe hosting, maybe domain name, $100 maybe a year at that, hosting. If you get a shared host and you're doing a bunch of, multiple sites on one host, it's even less, but
Right.
$10 a year, $20 a year for a domain name. It's not like we're, Apple building, investing I don't know how much they invested in, having to have a space and build computers and physical products and all these things. We're not doing that, so try those little things. And if it fails, so what? The chances are good nobody noticed anyway, So that's kind of something. I don't know if you've run into that or you've witnessed that, but that's kind of like I've had to deal with that, especially deal with the podcast and things like that. What if people don't listen, and what if nobody downloads and blah blah blah? Like, so what? I don't know. It's kind of funny. I feel like that's something a lot of people deal with.
Fear and cynicism. I'm telling you right now, if there's one thing anyone takes away from this listen, is to do what you must to eliminate fear and cynicism from your daily diet, because those things will hurt, they will slow you down, they'll cripple you in place for as long as they're in the room. And that's why I really say to people is try to reframe that fear you have of no one's going to buy this. I'm going to post something on social media. It only got 300 views, and oh look, like all my assumptions are confirmed. I'm terrible. I'm an awful human being, right? Is you have to reframe that as I'm learning. These are experiments, and I am learning. And that experiment, it didn't succeed or fail. That experiment had a lesson associated with it. Yeah. And that's how I treat content. That's how I treat every product I launched. I'm terrified. Listen, the fear's still there, right? Like every time I launch something, every time I create a new idea, because publishing ideas in the form of content online, whether it's on my LinkedIn channel or TikTok or Instagram, wherever, is always scary to me. There's always going to be criticism. There's always going to be something that probably could have been articulated better or presented in a better way. And if I listened to that fear, I wouldn't publish. I wouldn't learn. I wouldn't get better. And I wouldn't get all the other second order effects from those experiments, like financial increase and these other things that happen from that. And so please get rid of fear and cynicism. Please learn to treat that fear as a signal of growth. You're about to do something you haven't done before, and that should be exciting. You're about to learn some lessons because, like you said, the consequences of this are really much smaller than we make them out to be. We're not in this case. In this case, we're not saving lives. In this case, we're not. One of the great things about kind of relying on yourself is you're kind of only letting yourself down. You don't have a giant team of people's livelihood that hangs in the balance of your decision making. So rely on that. Like leverage that as your competitive advantage, because you might get good at this and you may not have that luxury 5 years from now.
That's true.
Now you have employees, and then you'll be like, I never thought I'd be in this place. And now I have to be more thoughtful. So appreciate the kind of competitive advantages that you have already right now. And you can't see those things if you're focused too heavily on the fear and the things that are kind of holding you back.
Absolutely, man. I came across an article on Psychology Today not long ago, and they talked about the actual science proves out that people who can forgive themselves tend to have like less stressful, more like happier lives, and it's that idea, that growth mindset, just like you mentioned, every failure is an opportunity to learn. Just try not to fail the same way twice. Fail in a different way, learn, and then go on. I think that's such a powerful advice. I think anybody, regardless of what you're doing, regardless of what industry you're in, that's a life lesson right there.
I think that's huge. I spent some time I spent a significant amount of time, like not an in-house, but like a partial thing that I attended for DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. And it was when I was in San Francisco, and it was like a 8 weeks, like Monday through Friday. I had a fortunate situation where I was able to attend this Monday through Friday for a couple hours, of a handful of hours each day.
Wow.
And it changed my life. I mean, I was in a really bad place mentally. And I was really fortunate to have this program. And it really taught me different exercises for holding multiple truths in my mind without letting that duality kind of tear me apart. So the idea that you create something, and this is an example, and that thing that you created, not a lot of people like it, or it doesn't doesn't meet the expectations you had set out for it. That can be true. The thing you created just isn't that valuable to other people. What's also true in that same place is you're still a valuable person.
Oh.
And so many, and it's like, it's little examples like that where we forget that when we're going through these little mini traumas or huge traumas. We lose a job, or we go through an interview cycle, and that interview cycle turns out to not include us moving forward. And all of us feel it right away, like, I'm not good enough. This system is rigged against me. There's so many things that we immediately just identify as individual truths. But it's harder for us to kind of hold the multiple truths that exist. Well, I wasn't a good fit, but I'm a good fit for somebody. I'm still worthwhile. And really learning to like live and identify those truths when they exist. I mean, like I said, I took a whole program on it, and I'm still not perfect at it.
Yeah.
So I definitely understand where it's a really hard thing for people in general. But that's been one of the more meaningful things that's helped me in a lot of the mental hits that I take, because this is exhausting. Life is tough, guys. Like, let's be, and that's all part of it.
Yeah, you're right. All right, Tommy. So we've had you for a little bit now. Before we get out of here, any resources, any advice, or any resources or places people can go to learn more about entrepreneurship if this is the first time kind of stepping their toes? You got any advice? Any thoughts? Any places to go?
I don't know if I have any resources right off the bat. What I would say to people is just try to have some fun with, like, the distribution model is so free on the internet now. You don't have to have a big audience to just put some ideas out there, whether it's a post or a template or hey, I made this thing. And then suddenly, like, I see it and I like it. And I have a thing where if I see smaller creators doing things like that, I love to actually share their things, and I like to put them on because I've always had like a passion for small creators. So do things like that, because there's a lot of people like me that are out there.
Absolutely.
And it's, if you don't throw your hat in the ring, well, you certainly will fail.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this, again, like this networking piece, like finding people like you on LinkedIn, for instance.
Yeah.
What's the worst that could happen? You don't respond to a message, or you don't respond to a comment, or you don't ever like their post. It's just like, well, the worst that could happen. Just try it. I mean, even regardless of you're a hiring manager, a recruiter, or an entrepreneur, or an influencer on social media, who gives a shit? Just try. It's just, anyway, I love that advice, man. That's great. You don't try, you're definitely going to fail. So I love that. All right, Tommy. Awesome, man. Well, I got a few questions that I like to ask all my guests to get I've asked you like a million questions. These are 5 more questions, completely unrelated to the conversation today, to help all of our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. You got a few minutes to stick around to do this thing.
Do it.
Right on, man. All right. First up, what is your favorite non-design book?
It's still design adjacent, though.
That's okay.
So I would say Eliyahu Goldratt has a book called The Goal that I got a lot of value out of. And if you haven't read it, I'll summarize it without the spoilers. It's like in narrative form, and it follows like a manufacturing plant in the 80s and a manager trying to figure out, like, we're doing all these things, we're implementing all these systems, but we're like still facing layoffs, and the end metrics that we're measuring are not moving favorably. And he's having kind of this crisis about, why is that happening? I'm doing all the things we're supposed to be doing. I'm putting all the processes that everyone's talking about in place that are supposed to work. What am I missing? And the entire takeaway of the book, and it does this in a pretty elegant way, is like, what is the goal of getting that factory to work? Like, what is, like, out of all the convoluted stuff that you've thought, what is the goal? And the goal being, it's we need to help this company create revenue, and let's focus on like what that means. Let's not get tied into all the convoluted things that we read and hear about. And let's remember that, like, the way we can implement processes is really up to us. We can be creative about that. It just needs to focus on the goal.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I've never heard of that book, but that's awesome. Because that also, too, I mean, design adjacent, it definitely, I could see exactly how that would apply to something like product design. You know, like,
Right.
what are we doing? Why are we here? What is the what is the meaning of life? You know, and trying to figure out how to make that product meet whatever goals, business goals, customer goals, user goals, outcomes, whatever it is. That's awesome, man. I love that. I've never heard of it, but I will
can
definitely.
I get one more recommendation on the book
Yeah,
side?
go ahead, man. Sure, for sure.
So I read this a couple months back, The Second Machine Age, by Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee, two economists out of MIT. And they wrote this book 10 years ago, and they explore, they were talking very heavily, 10 years ago about the impact AI was going to have on the global and local economies.
Wow. Okay.
And they really dive into that. And I really recommend anybody, no matter what your stance is or, where your concerns are or how you feel about AI, to read that book. It is a fantastic look into what's yet to come. And they predicted a lot of things too.
Okay. So, well, question: 10 years ago, how accurate were they? Are they close? Are they off, or what?
Well, just the idea that like when AI would be silently, like in small rooms where the mainstream had no idea what was going on, minds would be blown, and then one day it would just show up in the mainstream and no one could ignore it. And arguably, we're not there yet, but ChatGPT could be kind of the first like domino effect to that. So that's the kind of thing, is like the sentiment, the impact on economy, the impact on society. We have yet to see some of the predictions or the things that they're cautiously optimistic about happen over the job market. But I think over the next 10 years, that's really the period they were looking at.
I can't even imagine 10 years from now I would have never guessed you'd be able to do what you could do with something like ChatGPT, even the simple stuff that it can do, just summarizing articles or whatever. I mean, even that alone is just incredible. Like, your bio, for instance, I read in the beginning, you gave me a list of 10 or 15 bullet points, and I just like turn this into a narrative type bio, and boom, it just spit it out. Saved me, 45 minutes or an hour of work. It's just incredible. Like, even that alone, I'd be happy with that, But like, where it's going in 10 years, I just can't imagine, man. It's crazy. All right. What is your favorite meal?
Ooh, that's so hard. I love food. I love food so much.
This could be something you cooked, something, your grandma used to cook. It could be something you've eaten at a restaurant.
Yeah.
Comfort food, whatever.
I love Korean food. I'm so big on Korean food. So just give me like some rice, some kimchi, and some bulgogi, and I'm good to go.
Man.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it, dude. There's a place down by our house. They've got the bibimbap, the stone pot. Oh my God. It's just like, I love it. And you get the egg, and then you like crack it, and boom, it goes over the side and it cooks, and then the rice is crispy. Oh my God. I love Korean food, dude. I think I could eat either like tacos and Korean food, or like the two. I could just eat. Oh my God, those two. If I could alternate every other day for the rest of my life,
yeah,
I'd be done, man. All right, what's your favorite vacation spot?
Oh, I'm simple, and I've been places, but I'll tell you what, I like kind of cabin woods vibe.
Dude.
Like I'm big into cabin woods, mountains. And, Tahoe has some beautiful spots that like during the winter are my jam, but Northern Colorado does it for me. And I live in Phoenix right now. That's where I'm going to go eventually. That's like, that's the goal. Once the kids are out of here, I'm going to be just cabined up somewhere.
Hell yeah, man. All right. So, well, if you're living there, you're probably going to get the internet. But if you're on vacation, do you go internet or no internet, off grid, or you got to be connected still?
I'm not at a place in my life where going off grid makes a lot of sense yet, but I think I fantasize about it. So one of these days.
I know, man. I'm like keep fantasizing about just getting a dumb phone, just a flip phone, no internet, no nothing. It's just it calls, and I get T9 texts, man. Back in the good old days, remind me of like high school, But yeah, I haven't pulled the trigger yet. It seems like it'd be so easy. Why is it so hard? I don't know, but it is. All right. What's your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
Rive is kind of cool, and I haven't done a lot with it yet, but I've opened it up. I've done a course on Rive. Rive helps you with like motion graphics, and man. I never considered myself, and I don't consider myself an illustrator. But there are things that like I'm good with interaction, and in JavaScript specifically, like it was my way of creating fun interactions between interface components. And Rive kind of opens up this door for me. Like I can create icons. I can create, not in Rive, but I can create icons, and I can create interactions, and I have a good sense on interaction patterns. And Rive kind of makes this more accessible for me than like After Effects, which is fine too.
Yeah.
But I don't know. So motion graphics is kind of a thing that I'm into these days, and I've been playing with.
Now, Rive, unless I'm thinking of a different tool, that will actually export it as JavaScript so that it can actually be built into the code base.
I believe
right?
I believe Rive can actually export for like React components and
yeah,
because
that's the thing with like Figma. I see all these amazing Figma components, and it's like, oh wow, look how this little micro animation, that's so cool. And the first thing I think is like, well, how the hell are you going to build that? Like, what engineer is taking that and making that pixel perfect? Like, the answer is none of them, right? but Rive will take it and actually build it, and they got no excuse. They're like, there it is. There's the code, man. Just plug that little function in, and boom, you got it.
We're getting so many tools, like the Lotties and everybody else. It's like creating these awesome tools out there. So it's nice to see that growing.
It is awesome. All right, Tommy. Well, that's it, man. That's all the questions I got for you today. Before you get out of here, man, why don't you tell us where we can find you? Give yourself a plug, all the stuff. Where can we find you? Where can we buy your stuff? Give us all that.
Yeah, I create some whimsical design content on TikTok at Designer Tom. Same with Instagram. It's Designer Tom on Instagram. And if you want to just reach out to me or see some of my musings, Tommy Geoco on LinkedIn. Feel free to DM me. I respond to everybody.
Right on. All right, Tommy. Well, thank you so much, man. This was an awesome conversation. I think a lot of people out there definitely struggling to find work might find some value in this, I think, for sure. Go and do your own thing, man. Don't be scared. Don't be scared. Just try it out. You already got the 70%. Just do that 30%. Make some money. Hold yourself over till you find that job. Or keep doing it forever. Who knows, man? Be like Tommy. Be an entrepreneur for life.
Thanks,
All right, man. Absolutely.